in the heart of the Mesopotamian plains, where the twin rivers of the Tigris and Euphrates flowed like silver serpents through the cradle of civilization, the city of Babylon stood as a testament to the might of man. It was the jewel of an empire forged in fire and conquest, the seat of power for King Nebuchadnezzar, a monarch whose name was whispered with both awe and terror across the known world. Under his command, Babylon had become more than a capital. It was a defiant proclamation carved into the very earth. Its indomitable walls soared to such heights that they seemed to graze the underbelly of the heavens, and atop them the fabled hanging gardens bloomed in eternal spring, a lush paradise suspended in the arid air, a miracle of engineering that bent nature to a mortal's will. His armies, a gleaming tide of bronze and iron, had washed over nations, leaving conquered kings and shattered cities in their wake. The riches of 100 peoples, gold from Lydia, cedar from Lebanon, spices from the distant east filled his treasuries to overflowing. Nebuchadnezzar possessed everything a man could desire: absolute power, unparalleled wealth, and the fealty of millions. Yet, within the soul of this great king, a profound restlessness stirred, for there remained one domain he could not conquer, one sovereign he could not command: the primordial darkness of the night. Each evening, as the sun god Shamash retreated in his fiery chariot, a shadow fell across his magnificent kingdom. From the highest terrace of his ziggurat palace, he would gaze out at his creation. The city below, a sprawling marvel of human achievement, became a tapestry of flickering, impotent torchlight, dwarfed by the immense, star-dusted void above. He watched his merchant ships on the Euphrates, navigating not by his decree, but by the cold, distant light of constellations he did not create. The moon, a fickle orb, waxed and waned according to its own celestial rhythm, paying no heed to the king of Babylon. A bold, audacious thought, a spark of ultimate hubris ignited in his mind. Why must I, the ruler of this earth, yield to the tyranny of the sky's darkness? He mused, his voice a low growl that carried on the desert wind. Why should humanity bow to the phases of the moon, or navigate by the whims of the stars? I, Nebuchadnezzar, shall forge a son of my own, an eternal flame, a beacon that never sets, will banish the night from Babylon, and declare to the cosmos itself that the power of my empire is absolute. This colossal ambition swiftly transformed into a tangible plan. The most brilliant architects in the empire were summoned. The most learned mathematicians were tasked with impossible calculations. Thus began the most audacious construction project in human history. 100,000 hands toiled under the blistering sunday. Slaves, captured from his many wars, dragged monolithic blocks of stone from distant quarries, their sweat and blood mixing with the dust of the plains. Master craftsmen, their skills honed over generations, carved intricate reliefs, and assembled a tower of such staggering proportions that it made the ancient ziggurat seem like trifles. Day by day, it rose, a stone finger pointing defiantly at the heavens. At its pinnacle, a masterpiece of alchemy and artistry took shape. In secret forges, the king's wisest men labored to create a colossal lens of purest crystal, flawless and immense. For months, it was ground and polished with diamond dust until its surface was as smooth as still water, capable of capturing and focusing the light of a perpetual flame. This fire, fed by the most precious and slow-burning oils, was designed never to be extinguished. He named his creation the Light of Babylon. It was more than a lighthouse. It was a challenge to the gods, a monument to the limitless pride of a man who believed his will could rewrite the laws of creation. Across the empire, a sense of anxious anticipation grew. Could a mortal truly create his own sun? And if so, how long would the heavens remain silent in the face of such arrogance? After 3 grueling years of ceaseless labor, the day of completion arrived. A palpable tension hung over Babylon. The tower stood silhouetted against the afternoon sun, a monolithic marvel, its crystal lens glittering with unspoken potential. King Nebuchadnezzar had decreed a celebration grander than any before it. Satraps from Media, generals from Elam, and nobles from Phoenicia, all the subjugated rulers of his vast domain were compelled to attend, their colorful banners, a testament to the empire's sprawling reach. As the sun began its descent, painting the sky in hues of orange and violet, the king appeared on a grand dais before the tower. He was a figure of pure majesty, draped in a robe of royal purple embroidered with golden thread, his crown ablaze with the fire of countless jewels. He stood before his court and the assembled masses, his eyes burning with triumphant pride. His voice, strong and resonant, carried across the silent square. "Today," he proclaimed, "history itself bends to my will. No longer will Babylon be subject to the fickle light of the heavens. My light, the light of Nebuchadnezzar, shall guide our ships and illuminate our cities. My power will shield you from the darkness. When the first flame is kindled, when the light of Babylon awakens, all of you, from the highest governor to the lowliest captive, shall prostrate yourselves and worship this great work, the eternal symbol of my power and the glory of Babylon." A royal herald then stepped forward, unrolling a scroll. The decree was read in a stark, unyielding tone. Any person, of any nation or language, who failed to bow and worship the light of Babylon would face the most severe punishment imaginable. A chill ran through the crowd. This was not a mere demand for loyalty. It was a command for divine adoration, a claim to godhood. Within the assembly of officials, in a place of honor due to their wisdom, stood 4 young men from the captive nation of Judah. Daniel, whom the king had renamed Belteshazzar, and his 3 companions, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, now known throughout the court as Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. They had served the king with distinction, their intellect and integrity earning them high positions. But as the decree echoed in the square, their gazes were not fixed upon the magnificent tower. Their thoughts turned inward, to the covenant they held with their own God, an unseen but ever-present deity whose first commandment was to have no other gods before him. Daniel exchanged a brief, knowing glance with his friends. No words were necessary. Their faith, forged in the crucible of exile, was about to face its ultimate test. They stood at a precipice, forced to choose between the command of the most powerful man on earth and the sacred law of the God they served. As twilight deepened into night, the atmosphere in the grand square grew electric with anticipation. Thousands of torches cast a flickering golden glow upon the faces of the crowd, but their combined light was but a whisper against the colossal shadow of the silent tower. King Nebuchadnezzar, seated upon his ornate throne, fixed his gaze upon its peak, his expression a mask of intense concentration. At a signal from the king, a procession of priests, robed in immaculate white, entered the base of the tower. A hush fell over the tens of thousands gathered. Moments later, a tiny spark appeared high above, a new star born of human hands. Fed by fragrant oils, the spark grew into a great, roaring flame. As its light struck the crystal lens, a miracle of mortal design unfolded. A beam of pure, brilliant white light, as powerful as the midday sun, erupted from the tower's summit, cutting a radiant path across the nocturnal sky. The city, moments before steeped in darkness, was bathed in an astonishing artificial daylight. A collective gasp of wonder rose from the crowd, followed by a thunderous cheer. Immediately, a symphony of horns, flutes, zithers, lyres, and harps filled the air, a majestic anthem composed to honor the king's triumph. As the music swelled, the royal herald cried out the command. In perfect unison, the vast sea of humanity, generals and governors, merchants and peasants prostrated themselves, their foreheads touching the cold stone of the plaza in adoration of the light of Babylon. Yet, amidst this landscape of submission, three figures remained standing, tall, resolute, and unmoving. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego stood like solitary pillars in a fallen temple. Their faces were calm, their eyes lifted not to the blinding man-made light, but to the distant, true stars twinkling in the heavens where the God of their fathers reigned. Their silent defiance was an act more powerful, more resonant than the loudest trumpet blast. It did not go unnoticed. The sharp eyes of several Chaldean astrologers, who had long harbored jealousy towards the rapid rise of the young Hebrews, saw their chance. They hurried before the throne, their voices laced with malicious glee. "O King, live forever," one of them exclaimed. "There are certain Jews whom you have set over the affairs of the province of Babylon, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who have paid no attention to you, O King. They neither serve your gods nor worship the light of Babylon which you have set up." The king's face, which had been glowing with triumph, contorted into a dark mask of fury. The celebration in his heart turned to ash. He commanded his guards to bring the three men before him. As they stood before the throne, their composure unshaken, Nebuchadnezzar struggled to control his rage. "Is it true, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego," he began, his voice dangerously low, "that you do not serve my gods or worship the light I have created? I will give you one more chance. When you hear the music, if you are ready to fall down and worship, it will be well. But if you do not, you shall know my wrath." Shadrach, speaking for his companions, answered with a calm that defied the king's fury. "O Nebuchadnezzar, we have no need to answer you in this matter. If we are punished, our God whom we serve is able to deliver us, and he will deliver us from your hand, O King. But even if he does not, let it be known to you, O King, that we will not serve your gods or worship the creation of your hands." The unwavering defiance in their reply shattered the last vestiges of Nebuchadnezzar's self-control. His rage, a storm that had been gathering behind his eyes, finally broke forth. He, who was accustomed to the unquestioning obedience of entire nations, could not fathom such insubordination. This public challenge, in the very moment of his greatest triumph, was an intolerable insult to his majesty. "A fiery furnace," he roared, his voice echoing with terrible power through the silent hall. "No, that punishment is too swift, too merciful for these insolent fools. They scorn my light, do they? They put their faith in an unseen god of darkness. Then let them have their fill of it." His finger, trembling with rage, pointed towards a foreboding structure in a remote corner of the palace grounds. "Cast them into the pit of eternal night, a place where even the magnificent beam of my tower cannot reach. Let them be consumed by the very darkness they cherish, and let us see if their God can save them from silence and despair." The pit of eternal night was not a common prison. It was a place of legend, a whispered horror reserved for the most heinous traitors. It was an abyss hewn from the bedrock beneath Babylon, a subterranean chamber with walls of polished black basalt, so thick they absorbed all sound. Its only entrance was sealed by a single, colossal block of granite, fitted so perfectly that not a single photon of light could penetrate its seal. Inside, there was no air, no sound, no light, only a perfect, suffocating void designed to shatter the sanity of any who entered. At the king's command, his strongest guards, men inured to the brutalities of war, seized the three young men. Even these hardened soldiers felt a primal fear as they approached the pit. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego offered no resistance. They allowed their hands and feet to be bound with thick ropes, their faces serene. As they were dragged past the stunned crowd, their quiet dignity stood in stark contrast to the king's furious tirade. They were brought to the entrance, a gaping black maw that seemed to exhale a chilling cold. The guards, their usual bravado gone, hesitated at the threshold. But the king's order was absolute. With a great heave, they hurled the three bound figures into the profound blackness. The dull thud of their bodies hitting the distant floor was the last sound heard before a team of laborers, with immense effort, rolled the massive stone plug into place. A final, deafening boom echoed as the seal was set, and then an unnerving silence fell. Nebuchadnezzar stood watching, his chest heaving, a grim satisfaction spreading across his face. He had crushed the rebellion. He had proven his power. He was certain that in that eternal darkness, the three defiant Hebrews and their invisible God would be utterly and irrevocably erased from existence. Though vengeance had been served, King Nebuchadnezzar found no peace. The joyous spirit of the festival had vanished, replaced by a gnawing disquiet. He retired to his royal chambers, but sleep eluded him. The image of the three young men, standing resolute in the face of death, haunted his thoughts. Their calm faith was a mystery his power could not solve. Hours later, unable to bear the turmoil in his mind, he rose. Accompanied only by a pair of torch-bearing guards, he made his way back through the silent palace to the pit of eternal night. He motioned for the guards to stay back as he approached a small, hidden viewing slit in the wall, a tiny aperture covered by a stone plug, the only way to observe the fate of those within. He expected to hear nothing but the silence of the tomb, to see nothing but absolute blackness. He slid the stone aside and peered into the abyss. What he saw sent a jolt of pure shock through his body. He stumbled backward, his heart pounding against his ribs. The pit, which should have been a void of total darkness, was filled with a soft, ethereal glow. This was no firelight. It was a living, breathing luminescence that emanated from the very air within the chamber. And walking within this halo of supernatural light were not three figures, but four. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego were unbound, moving freely and conversing with a fourth companion. This fourth figure was unlike any mortal man. His form shone with an inner brilliance, and his countenance held a majesty and peace that was not of this world. He looked, the king thought with a gasp, like a son of the gods. Nebuchadnezzar began to tremble, not with anger, but with a primordial reverence, a feeling utterly foreign to him. His power, his empire, his magnificent lighthouse all seemed like childish toys before the scene unfolding in the dark. He scrambled back and screamed, his voice cracking with a mixture of terror and awe. "Open the gate! Open the gate at once!" The terrified guards rushed to obey, their combined strength straining against the colossal stone. As the seal was broken, the divine light spilled out from the pit, bathing the astonished onlookers in its gentle radiance. The king, his fear warring with his disbelief, stepped forward and called out, "Shadrach, Meshach, Abednego, servants of the Most High God, come out, come here." The three men walked out of the pit, their expressions as serene as when they had entered. The assembled satraps, governors, and counselors crowded around, their eyes wide with disbelief. A hushed awe fell over them. Not a hair on their heads was singed. Their robes were clean, untouched by dust or grime. There was no smell of the dank, airless prison upon them. They appeared as if they had just returned from a pleasant walk in the royal gardens. In that moment, the immense pride of Nebuchadnezzar shattered. The king who ruled the world fell to his knees on the cold stone, prostrating himself before three of his captives. He cried out, his voice filled with wonder, "Praise be to the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. He has sent his angel and rescued his servants." They trusted in him and defied the king's command, willing to give up their lives rather than serve or worship any god except their own God. For the first time in his reign, Nebuchadnezzar had not just acknowledged, but had praised a power greater than his own, a true light that could pierce even the deepest darkness. In the wake of the miracle at the pit of eternal night, King Nebuchadnezzar promoted Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego to even higher positions within the province of Babylon. He issued a decree across his vast empire, declaring that any person who spoke against the God of the Hebrews would be torn limb from limb and their house turned into a pile of rubble. For a time, it seemed the king had been profoundly changed. A seed of humility had been planted in the hardened soil of his heart. But the memory of miracles can fade in the constant glare of earthly power. As months turned into a year, the awe Nebuchadnezzar had felt began to recede. His armies won new victories. His architects designed ever more splendid buildings, and the light of Babylon continued to pierce the night sky, a constant reminder of his achievement. The king began to rationalize what he had seen. Their God is indeed powerful, he would concede to himself, but he is their God. It is Marduk, the great god of Babylon, who has granted me dominion over the earth. The light of Babylon is still a monument to my genius. The fragile seedling of humility withered as the old, familiar weed of pride grew back, stronger and more deeply rooted than before. It was during this period of renewed arrogance that another dream came to trouble his sleep. It was not a chaotic nightmare, but a vision of terrifying clarity. He dreamt he was standing at the very top of the light of Babylon, surveying his kingdom under its brilliant, artificial sunday. He felt an intoxicating surge of power, as if he were the master of all he surveyed. Then he heard a faint cracking sound. A hairline fracture appeared on the massive crystal lens. With horrifying speed, the fracture spiderwebbed across the entire surface. The eternal flame within, no longer focused, refracted into a blinding, chaotic storm of light. 1,000 searing beams shot out in all directions, and a volley of them struck the king directly in the eyes. The pain was excruciating, as if molten glass had been poured into his skull. He screamed, and his world was plunged into an absolute, impenetrable blackness. Blinded and disoriented, he felt the tower beneath him begin to tremble violently. Its foundations gave way, and the great stones began to fall. The king, in his dream, felt himself plummeting into a bottomless abyss, the sound of his magnificent creation crumbling to dust roaring in his ears. He awoke with a violent jolt, his body drenched in cold sweat. The dream's agony still lingered, a phantom pain behind his eyes. He sat bolt upright in his royal bed, his heart hammering against his ribs. The darkness of his bedchamber, usually a comforting embrace, now felt menacing, echoing the terrible blackness of his dream. This was no mere flight of fancy. It was a prophecy, a dire warning etched in the language of his own pride. A deep, chilling fear, far greater than any he had known on the battlefield, settled upon him, for he sensed that this dream was not about his enemies, but about his own impending doom. At first light, a frantic summons was sent throughout the palace. King Nebuchadnezzar, haggard and shaken, gathered the wise men of Babylon, the magicians, the enchanters, the sorcerers, and the astrologers. He sat slumped on his throne, the usual air of indomitable authority replaced by a visible, raw anxiety. His eyes, dark-ringed from a sleepless night, darted nervously around the grand hall. With a voice strained by fear, he recounted the dream in every terrifying detail. The prideful stance atop the tower, the splintering of the great crystal lens, the chaotic light that stole his vision, and the cataclysmic collapse of his proudest creation. As he finished, a heavy silence descended upon the assembly. The wise men, usually so quick with their interpretations and pronouncements, now exchanged uneasy glances, their faces pale. They could read omens in the stars and divine futures from sacrificial entrails, but this dream was too direct, too personal, too terrifyingly clear in its implications. None dared to voice an interpretation that might ignite the king's already volatile temper. Seeing their utter helplessness, Nebuchadnezzar's fear curdled into rage. "Useless," he bellowed, his voice cracking. "You feed on my wealth and boast of your wisdom, yet in my hour of need, you are silent. What good are you to me?" It was then that the chief of his officials, remembering a similar crisis, stepped forward and bowed low. "O king, live forever," he said humbly. "There is a man in your kingdom in whom is the spirit of the holy gods. He is called Belteshazzar, and no mystery is too difficult for him." Daniel was brought before the king. He entered the hall not with the trepidation of the others, but with a quiet, dignified composure. He listened intently as the king, his voice now subdued, recounted the dream once more. When the tale was done, Daniel stood motionless for a full minute, his expression filled with a profound sorrow. His thoughtful silence was more unsettling to the king than all the panicked babbling of his other advisers. Finally, Daniel spoke, his voice filled with both gravity and compassion. "My lord, O king," he began, "may this dream be for those who hate you, and its meaning for your enemies. Alas, it is for you. The great lighthouse, soaring in its strength and splendor, is you, O king. You have become great and strong. Your dominion has reached to the ends of the earth. But because you have allowed your heart to be lifted up in pride, claiming for yourself the glory that belongs only to the Creator, your own glory will become your undoing." Daniel's gaze met the king's, unflinching. The shattering of the lens and the light that blinded you signifies that judgment is coming. The light of reason and sanity will be taken from you. You will be driven away from people and will live with the wild animals, until you acknowledge that the Most High is sovereign over the kingdoms of men and gives them to anyone he wishes. Having delivered the fearsome prophecy, Daniel did not retreat. He saw the terror in the king's eyes and offered a sliver of hope, a path of mercy. "Therefore, O king, be pleased to accept my advice. Renounce your sins by doing what is right, and your wickedness by being kind to the oppressed. It may be that then your prosperity will continue." It was an audacious act to not only predict a king's downfall, but to instruct him on how to avoid it. For the first time, someone had not only diagnosed Nebuchadnezzar's fatal flaw, but had also prescribed the only possible cure: humility and justice. The fate of the king, and perhaps the empire, hung on his response. Daniel's words struck Nebuchadnezzar with the force of a physical blow. The hall remained deathly quiet, the king frozen on his throne. The raw truth in the young Hebrew's interpretation was undeniable, resonating with the terror he had felt in the dream. He dismissed Daniel and his advisers, seeking solitude to grapple with the chilling prophecy. Daniel's counsel, to renounce sin through righteousness and show mercy to the poor, echoed in the vast emptiness of his chambers. For a time, the king seemed to heed the warning. A change came over his rule. He ordered the release of certain prisoners of war, distributed grain to provinces suffering from drought, and even spent time hearing the petitions of common citizens. A flicker of genuine humility seemed to temper his iron will. It appeared that the spectre of madness had frightened him into a state of grace. But pride is a resilient weed. 12 months passed. The empire remained secure, its borders peaceful, its granaries full. The light of Babylon, though its story was now tinged with a dark prophecy, still stood majestic, its nightly beam a symbol of Babylonian dominance. The memory of the dream and the stark warning began to feel distant, like a half-forgotten fever. Nebuchadnezzar's heart began to harden once more. He looked upon his works and saw not the blessing of any god, but the product of his own genius and might. One temperate afternoon, as a gentle breeze drifted in from the river, the king was walking on the flat roof of his royal palace. The panoramic view was breathtaking. He saw the gleaming canals, the majestic temples, the verdant splendor of his hanging gardens, and in the distance, his great tower piercing the sky. A wave of immense self-satisfaction washed over him. He spread his arms wide, as if to embrace his entire creation, and declared to the empty air, his voice swelling with arrogance, "Is not this the great Babylon I have built as the royal residence? By my mighty power, and for the glory of my majesty." The words had barely left his lips when the very atmosphere seemed to shift. While the sky was clear, a voice, like the roll of distant thunder, came from heaven. "This is what is decreed for you, King Nebuchadnezzar. Your royal authority has been taken from you." As the last word echoed, a brilliant, blinding flash of lightning, seemingly born from the cloudless sky, struck the pinnacle of the lighthouse. A deafening crack resounded as the colossal crystal lens exploded into a million shimmering fragments. A chain reaction of destruction followed. The tower groaned, shuddered, and then, with a terrible roar, it began to crumble. The monument to one man's pride collapsed in upon itself, crashing to the ground in a cataclysmic cloud of dust and debris. Simultaneously, on the palace rooftop, Nebuchadnezzar let out a piercing scream of agony, clutching his eyes. The phantom pain from his dream became a searing reality. When he finally, tremblingly, lowered his hands, the magnificent vista of his city was gone. All that remained was an impenetrable, eternal black. The judgment foretold had come to pass. The dual catastrophe, the instantaneous destruction of the lighthouse and the king's sudden affliction, plunged the Babylonian court into chaos and terror. But the horror was only beginning. The same divine stroke that had taken Nebuchadnezzar's sight also shattered his mind. The brilliant strategist, the eloquent statesman, was gone. In his place was a creature of raw, primal instinct, howling nonsensically and clawing at his own flesh. He no longer recognized his most trusted advisors, his wives, or his own sons. To prevent the empire from fracturing at the sight of its king's madness, the royal council, in a secret and desperate move, had him removed from the palace. Nebuchadnezzar, the once mighty ruler, was driven out to live in the royal gardens and surrounding fields. His life became a blur of instinct and confusion. He crawled on all fours, his now useless eyes wide and unseeing. His royal robes disintegrated into rags, leaving his body exposed to the elements. His hair, once perfumed and styled, grew long, coarse, and matted like the feathers of an eagle. His fingernails, untended, grew into curved claws like those of a bird. He forgot the taste of wine and roasted meats, feeding instead on the grass of the field, just as the prophecy had foretold. He drank the morning dew collected on broad leaves. He was no longer a man, but a beast, living under the open sky, his body drenched by the rains of winter and baked by the sun of summer. His world was a dual darkness, the physical blackness of his blindness and the chaotic tempest of his broken mind. 7 seasons passed, 7 cycles of planting and harvest, 7 long, humiliating years. It was a period of utter desolation, a divine lesson in humility for the proudest man on earth. He, who had commanded millions, was now less than the lowliest of his subjects. Stripped of his power, his wealth, his appearance, and even his reason, all that was left was the bare, suffering essence of his being. Then, at the end of the appointed time, as dawn broke on the first day of the 8th year, a flicker of consciousness returned. Lying in the damp grass, Nebuchadnezzar felt the warmth of the rising sun on his face, and for the first time in 7 years, a coherent thought formed in his mind. He did not remember his throne or his armies, but he remembered the dream. He remembered Daniel's words. He remembered the God of the Hebrews. Though his eyes could not see, he lifted his haggard face toward the heavens. No words came from his lips, but in the depths of his restored soul, a prayer of pure surrender took form. He acknowledged the Most High God. He acknowledged his eternal dominion and his absolute power to raise up and cast down whom he pleased. He acknowledged his own monumental pride and folly. In the desolate field, the broken king finally bowed his heart, not to an idol of his own making, but to the true and living God. In the very instant that Nebuchadnezzar's silent, heartfelt confession ascended to the heavens, the long winter of his affliction ended, The tormenting chaos in his mind ceased, giving way to a profound and tranquil clarity. A gentle warmth spread through him, and then a miracle. A faint glimmer pierced the 7-year darkness of his vision. The glimmer grew, colors began to separate from the grey void, and soon the shapes of the trees and the vibrant green of the grass came into sharp focus. His sight was restored. His sanity was returned. He looked down at his own wretched form, the matted hair, the claw-like nails, the dirt-caked skin, and the full weight of his humbling ordeal settled upon him. Yet there was no bitterness, no rage. There was only an overwhelming sense of gratitude and peace. He had been stripped of everything, only to receive it all back. But now he was a different man. He had been purged of the poison of pride. At that moment, his most loyal counselors and nobles, who had been searching for him, found him. They stared in disbelief. Before them was not the wild beast man they had guarded from afar, but their king, his eyes clear and intelligent, his bearing imbued with a new, quiet majesty, the authority of a man who had faced the abyss and returned. They clothed him in fresh royal robes and escorted him back to the palace, not with fear, but with a newfound reverence. Nebuchadnezzar reascended his throne, and his glory, honor, and splendor were returned to him, even greater than before. But the king who now ruled was not the man who had been cast down. He governed with a wisdom tempered by suffering, a justice informed by mercy, and a power constrained by humility. His first act was not to command a new monument, but to issue a final, enduring decree to every nation and people under his rule. It was not a command, but a testimony. He recounted his entire story: the pride, the dreams, the warning from Daniel, the terrible judgment, and the miraculous restoration. He concluded his proclamation with words that would echo through history. Now I, Nebuchadnezzar, praise and exalt and glorify the King of heaven, because everything he does is right, and all his ways are just, and those who walk in pride he is able to humble. The legend of King Nebuchadnezzar and the Lighthouse of Pride became more than just a tale of a fallen tower. It became an eternal parable for all humankind. It taught that the greatest power is not found in building monuments that scrape the sky, but in the humility to bow before the one who created it. It revealed that the most brilliant light is not one forged by human hands to defy the darkness, but the light of grace and truth that can find and restore a soul even from the deepest, most desperate of pits. And so, the kingdom of Babylon, for a time, was ruled by a king who finally understood that true greatness lies not in being served, but in serving the King of heaven.